Nelly, okay, from St. Louis, burst into the scene with his song Country Grammar. That sold 10 million albums. So it's a diamond album. That was just 10 million albums sold in America. And let's just go into the singles of this really quickly, because we all know Country Grammar, the single, was a beast. Then you had EI, which probably was the least well performed song on the album, but EI had Batter Up. It had what's those songs now? Ride With Me, Batter Up, EI. EI was my song. Oh my days. Ride With Me was the biggest song though. That song was all over the radio back in the day. But that album sold 10 million in 2000. What I liked about Nelly, in terms of checking out his history, is that he very rarely had many. His first album sold so much it didn't even have any features. The only people on that album was Lil Wayne, and he still ended up selling 10 million. That was just pure good music that sold the album. There was no he was shot a bunch of times or he had beef with such and such. It was just good music. Very rarely you have somebody come out and they're not under a super producer, or their artist is a big artist, or they got beef with some other big rapper. His one was just pure music. Very rare in hip hop that someone is that successful and it's just the music. Obviously he was with a big label, Universal, but there's plenty of people on big labels that don't do well. But yeah, 2 years later, Nelly came out with Nellyville, which sold 6.5 million albums. Another album with hardly any features, just had Kelly Rowland and Justin Timberlake, and they were both on singles. So the biggest song on this was probably Nelly's biggest song he's done, is Hot in Here. He had Dilemma with Kelly Rowland. He had Air Force Ones. That was actually one of my favorite songs on the album. And then Work It, which would feature JT, Justin Timberlake. That was a good song as well, actually. Yeah. Just an album again, sold a lot of albums back in 2002. That was a big selling album. If you consider Jay-Z's biggest selling albums, about I think it's 5 million or 8 million. I think it's 5. The Hard Knock Life Volume 3 album. Nelly sold 10 in the first album and 6.5 the second album, which is incredible. But he was a hit guy. Like, Nelly had his own rapping style and the way he did hooks. And like I said, he doesn't even have any features. I mean, in 2002, he could have got, I don't know, a feature from Ja Rule or any big pop star. But he just he's selling these units by himself. Third album in 2004, Sweat / Suit. This is an album when he came out with, it was like basically a double CD. But he sold the Sweat album solo, and he sold the Suit album solo. So one of them sold 1 million, and the other one sold about 3. So overall, those two albums combined sold 4 million. So still a very successful album. This had a few more features though, and this came out in 2004. But this had Christina Aguilera, had Missy Elliott, had Mobb Deep. So a few more features, but still not that many, because in that era there was a lot more features on albums. But the hits again on this album had Flap Your Wings, that song, Do the Eagle. And then it had I remember that video had like a dirty version. Back in the day when they did dirty versions for their singles. And then it had that super pop song, My Place, with Jaheim. I couldn't stand that song. I hated that song with a passion. Yeah, My Place was horrible. But that was a big song. That was probably, arguably one of his best, probably top 3 of his biggest songs commercially. Then you had Nah Nah Nah. Oh yeah, that was that hood type of Art Temper song. That was my song as well. I used to play that on my iPod quite a lot. And then another big song actually, Over and Over Again with Tim, what was that boy's name? Tim McCraw, the country song. That was a big song. It was actually a good song actually. I liked that song. That was a cool song. It was pretty chilled out. Nelly showing his diversity there, that one. You see the hits this guy has, it's mad. He also had Grills. I think Grills came on that song and that album. Yeah, boy. Nelly has some joints. Next album, Brass Knuckles, 2008. This sold just gold. So for Nelly, that was a big drop. But 2008, people's albums were not selling like they used to. People weren't going multi-platinum like they were in the early of the decade. But yeah, to go from 10 million in 2000 to 2008 selling gold is not Nelly's level. But again, hits for days this album had. This had it had Party People with Fergie. It had Body on Me, sorry, with Akon and Ashanti. You know, him and Ashanti had a thing around that time. And then one of my favorites, probably my favorite off this album, was Stepped on My J's. That was my joint. That was my song. That was featuring Jermaine Dupri, Sierra. Was Bow Wow on that? Nah, I think it was just Jermaine Dupri and Bow and Sierra, because Sierra was hot back then. Sierra came out around 2005 or 4, so she was the big R&B girl then. The real princess of R&B, not Ashanti. I wasn't. Yeah. Anyway, but I would say this album, Brass Knuckles, was his last like semi-successful album with hits, proper hits on it. Because as much as the album only sold, went gold, which was still successful back then, but especially for a veteran at that point, it still had hits on it. So he had a few hits on the album. The next few albums were kind of Nelly on the way out, because he came out with the album 5.0, which only sold 300k, which is again a big drop for an artist the size of Nelly. And then the subsequent albums, there was M.O. I think Mo is his real name, and then that was in 2013. And then he had an album out. This actually shocked me. I didn't even know he had an album out in 2021, but he had one in 2021 which was called Heartland, which actually has a feature for Kelly Rowland on it. So for all those people that loved his song Dilemma back in 2002, probably go check that out. That's probably give you a bit of nostalgia. But yeah, in terms of music, that was it for Nelly. He hasn't put out any music since then. But obviously Nelly was like a big artist featuring on people's things. He had his own style, the way he wrote his hooks. I think the only rappers that had his catchy hooks or did hooks in a catchy way was 50 Cent and him in that era. You know, different styles, but you know, Ja Rule obviously was good as well. But Nelly had his own style, and then Flow Rider came out. There were a lot of comparisons with Flow Rider and Nelly, because they obviously sounded quite similar when Flow Rider came out with apple bottom jeans as well, and Nelly had a clothing line called Apple Bottom Jeans. Oh yeah, the Saint Lunatics as well. He had a group called the Lunatics. Saint Lunatics. They were alright, but weren't that good at the same time. I think Murphy Lee was the only one that came out of a solo project, and the only one that actually had a rap style that was actually quite decent.